Your wishing tree. Your wishing tree. The gist of the subject this morning is the power of mind. So I think we'll have to change that from your wishing tree to your willing tree, because will is the key behind the power of mind. Understand that. First we have the thought pattern. Then we have the utilization of will. If it is united with God's will, then the materialization comes through the agency of the great cosmic energy of God in us as life force. So understand that if you strengthen your will by uniting it with God's will and have the right pattern, then the right materialization will come. And you will know the power of mind. You can become very proficient in business, but far greater than that, you can become really advanced in spiritual things. And you can manifest, as you should, the fact that you are a child of God. And that power will come through the power of your mind, because you have joined your will with the great wisdom-guided will of God, or divine will. That's the key. Realize that. Those three essential things: the right thought pattern, secondly, the utilization of will, and thirdly, the result must surely come, because this is God's law. And if you conform to the necessary requisites, you will see the result of a great power of your mind. Now, wishing and willing. Wishing is a desire without the application of energy or will to bring about the desired result. There's a question of doubt there, don't you see? Wishing means the desire is there, but you do not follow it through with energy or the utilization of your will to produce the desired result. So when you do not follow through, the doubt is there. But now in willing is a desire plus the application of energy and the stick-to-itiveness until the desire is fulfilled. As Master says, I carry through on a desire until it is fulfilled. Most people do not carry through. They have plenty of desires, but they do not utilize their will and then follow it through. This can be done if you unite your will with God's divine will. And then you will know the power of mind. God's thought has made all things. It is your own mind and consciousness, I say that meaning the consciousness of God in you, that has produced this body and all things. Therefore the law is there. We have to fulfill the conditions of the law, as I have just said, then the result will be forthcoming. So understand this thing, that the desire must be followed by action of your own will. That gives you the power of the mind. And then all things are possible, because God has produced all things by that same law. And He is in us. His great consciousness is in us. His power is in us, if we can but feel it. And if we utilize that especially for the advancement of our spiritual side, that's the greatest thing. Then we are really using the power of mind to its highest degree, because we are becoming more spiritual day by day, until finally we realize our oneness with God's power and with His consciousness and with His love. In the case of Jesus and Lazarus, Jesus, what did He do? He didn't just wish Lazarus would come to life or be well. No. Jesus united His consciousness with God's power within Him. He united His will with God's will. And then, as God was the doer, Lazarus was lifted up. The same way with Shri Yukteswarji. Shri Yukteswarji, the pattern in his mind, or the pattern in God's consciousness, that he was to pass away 15 years before he did. But what did he do? By uniting his consciousness with God's consciousness, the pattern was changed. And he lived 16 years, I believe it was, until the Master came and saw him. And so that's the way the power of mind works. That's the way you change your wishing tree to the willing tree. First make the contact with God, and then his great power is sufficient for all things, even to moving that mountain we read about a little earlier into the sea, because God is the sole doer. Now, we are made in the image of God, as we have read from time to time, heard the saints say the same thing. And St. Paul said these words. He said, "Let the same mind be in you that was in Jesus Christ." Jesus Christ said, "I and my Father are one. I do nothing, but the Father in me doeth all things." And so St. Paul says, be of that same mind. We can, because we're made in the image of God. And if we realize that, then we can utilize the power of God in us. Because we are his children, we are one with him. We have to realize it and then do it through will, by uniting our will to his great cosmic will, his divine will. Now, I have a quotation I'd like to read you at this time from Sir James Jeans. It's a very wonderful quotation. Perhaps some of you have read it. I know the Master quotes James Jeans in his autobiography. But if you listen carefully, I know you'll get something out of this. 30 years ago we thought, or assumed, that we were heading toward the ultimate reality of a mechanical kind. It seemed to consist of a fortuitous jumble of atoms, which was destined to perform meaningless dances for a time under the action of blind, purposeless forces, and then fall back to form a dead world. Into this wholly mechanical world, through the play of the same blind forces, life had stumbled by accident. That was the belief. But, he says, today, there is a wide measure of agreement which, on the physical side of science, approaches almost to unanimity, that the stream of knowledge is heading toward a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than look like a machine. Then the final line is most wonderful. We discover that the universe shows evidence of a designing or controlling power that has something in common with our own individual minds. We are made in the image of God. Master, in talking to Professor Millikan, with whom you are all familiar and have read about, he said, "Isn't it so, Professor, that the will is the key power in creating things in the universe?" He says, yes. And so scientists believe that. Believe that in us is the same stuff which comes from the one eternal Father. If we can but make the union, then we can utilize his great power. And we have the same stuff, so to speak, as God is. And that's so because we are made in his image, and those who meditate regularly will find out that we're not this little limited body with all its limitations, but within us is a great consciousness, a consciousness of power and strength, a consciousness of love which supersedes this little bodily energy and consciousness. But this will not do you any good unless you meditate. Find it out. That's why I spoke this morning about the Wednesday meetings. Please, if you want to please God, increase the attendance here. It's your duty. God came to you as this channel. Do your duty. Come. Get others to come. Make this meeting, this Wednesday meeting, a place for people to contact the presence of God. That's what the Master wanted you to do. Let us try and do it. Now, how the mind works is the next thing. How the mind works. Two things to remember. First, there must be in your thought the right pattern. First, you must have the pattern. Then comes the second thing. Life force, or cosmic energy in you, flows under the impulse of your will. And then it produces or materializes the thought pattern which you have had. So you can see these two important things. The thought pattern is very, very important. And the second is the utilization of the power within you to project that thought pattern and materialize it. Now, those of you who are thin or want to be fat, remember that. And those of you who are fat, Want to be slim and in proportion? Remember that. Because we are, you cannot get away with it, the product of our thought. And if you keep your thought infiltrated with the presence of God within you, even though it is a nice, properly proportioned body, it will work. And you will become that through this law of which I have just spoken. Keep the thought pattern right. And then utilize the power of God's will within you to project it. But you first have to make the contact with God so that your will becomes the wisdom-guided will, the divine will of the one Father. These are important things to remember. Now, blisters have been produced on the skin by the power of mind. Professor James of Harvard, I think, was the one who did that. Now, changes take place in our body. Different things come there which we do not want. I don't like to name them. I don't like to give them any power, but things are produced there. Now, the same power that produced those pathological conditions within us, that same power can remove them, because that power has created your body and all its functions and its different organs and with their functions, it can remake them. It can heal. It can make you over, so to speak, if you keep the thought pattern right, and then if you do something about it. Not just keep thinking of, you want to be this way, you want to be that way, you've got to do something about it. That's the second thing, the utilization of will. And so, realize that the power of mind is tremendous. As it has created you from God's great consciousness and mind, it can also remake you, so to speak. There are many incidents of yogis in India who can eat poisons, ingest poisons without any ill effects. There are certain peoples in our own country who can eat toadstools. Why? Because the mind, the thought pattern is different. They've created a thought pattern, and those poisons in the toadstools do not bother them. And so let us realize that the power of mind is tremendous. If we understand it and then utilize the power of God within us to carry out the thought pattern, project it, materialize it as we would have it. One instance, one illustration I'll give you at this time is this. I remember, I've told you before, but I think it'll bear repeating, there was a taxi cab driver came to my office years ago. He was running that taxi cab stand. 24 hours he was at it, except perhaps a little sleep once in a while. And his tissues were in a very bad condition. Nothing would heal up. The pattern in his mind was wrong. Well, one day he came in and I saw he was changed. His face looked different. He says, I've sold my taxi cab stand. He felt good. And from then on, I had no trouble with medications. They reacted, and he changed completely. So there we have a little illustration of how the thought pattern, if it is right, can project different materializations which are right as you would have them. I have noticed in certain devotees, when they begin to follow self-realization, those that meditate, those that are sincere, they change. Their whole countenance changes. Why? Because they have the right thought pattern, and they have utilized their consciousness to oneness with God. And that thought pattern is projected according to His will, and they change. And it's the most wonderful thing to see the devotees change when the presence of God flows through them. That's the power of mind, because God's consciousness, His mind, is in us. And if you unite your mind and consciousness with His, then the thought pattern is projected rather easily. But if you do not, your own mind, your own individual mind is limited in power. But God's power is unlimited. So realize that. If you want to change, if you want to become as you should be, a true child of God, change the thought pattern, and then unite your consciousness with God, and He will project that thought pattern, and you will become just as you want to become, just as He would have you, just as our beloved Master would have you. And so, power of mind over the body is supreme, because the mind has produced your body. And when I say mind, I mean God's consciousness in us as his divine mind, has produced this body. So we should remember the body is made up of two kinds of cells. Just to make it brief, they are the active cells and they are the resting cells or the somatic cells. Now when the acting cells are working as they should, projecting the pattern which God has for us and from which he has produced us, then the body changes take place as they should. But when those cells become lazy, and that's just what they do, they lay down on the job, they become somatic cells, and then the ordinary changes of life in which elimination takes place and repair of tissue takes place does not happen because the cells are not working. They're lazy. They have become resting cells, somatic cells. They're retired, so to speak. Now, a strong mind, realize this, a strong mind can make those inactive cells, those somatic cells, once more become active, and then the body will be repaired. Old age will not come so soon, and the bodily changes will be right. Realize that one thing, that the cells are under control of your mind. And if you keep the thought pattern right, and then utilize the power of God within you, those cells will have to once more begin to work as they should, and they will. And when there are pathological conditions in the body, they get busy. They change those conditions, and health comes once more. Mind is supreme over the body. It can control even those cells, too, which have become lazy somatic cells. Now, there are a few things to remember about the mind and the body. I want to give you these because they're important. First, do not let the picture of disease get in the mind. Do not let a picture of disease get into the mind. The law of suggestion is very strong and active. I know the Master used to say continually, don't suggest to me. As you progress and become closer to God, the suggestions affect you more because the machine, the instrument is so highly keyed and so sensitive. We have to be more than careful, and so don't say to people, my, you look awful today. Don't say that. Listen, they'll begin to feel mean before you get the words out of your mouth. But say, if you see they look awful, don't say anything, or else say, how are things with you, you know. Don't say, you look terrible, because, listen, they'll take that suggestion, the mind will take that suggestion, and they will begin to feel mean right off. So the first thing to remember is, do not let the picture of disease get into the mind. That's very important. Now, another thing is this. If the picture gets in, don't let it stay there. Don't let the picture of disease stay in your mind. Sometimes the disease goes away, is taken away, subsides, and the mind still has the picture, and you're still ill and sick. These are important things. Just like the person who loses a leg, he can feel the leg there. Why? Because the pattern is still in his mind. He's retained it. And so, first, don't let the disease get in. Second, if it gets in, don't let it stay. Get it out. Get it out. Now, a third thing to remember is this, that fear and doubt inhibit the action of the mind. Fear and doubt inhibit the natural action of the power of mind within you. Now, the great Vyasa, the great Indian sage, says this, fear inhibits the effect of the mind on disease. Fear inhibits that protective effect of the mind on disease. And so let us understand that. A little story comes to my mind about Cromwell. On a certain occasion when his troops were crossing the river to attack the enemy, he concluded his speech with these words, put your trust in God, but mind, keep your powder dry. Put your trust in God, but keep your powder dry. And so, that we can change that to fit this illustration this way. We can say, put your trust in God, but utilize the power within you to keep fear and doubt out of your mind. Then God can work. Both things are necessary, so let us realize that. And finally, the fourth thing to remember is this. Never succumb to disease even though you're almost dead. Understand that. Never succumb to it. No matter how you feel, don't give in to it. I remember for many years that's the way I went to the office. Sometimes I couldn't pull one foot after the other, but I went, and by so doing, strength gradually came more and more to me. And so don't succumb to the disease. You know the story of the great Hindu saint who had a very devastating disease for many, many years. But he sat there and he meditated. He wouldn't give up. And he said, Father, if you but just once come into my temple, I know I'll be whole again. He kept at it, I think it was 18 years. Finally, one day, God came in, and he was whole. So don't give up. Don't succumb to the disease. Now, the greatest way to develop the power of mind is first to develop concentration. First to develop concentration. And second, put that concentration on God. Now, you cannot put your concentration on God if you don't have it. So through self-realization fellowship yoga, learn the techniques of concentration, utilize it, and then learn the higher techniques of concentration or of self-realization fellowship yoga, whereby you place that concentration on God. Whereby, having gathered your attention, which has been distributed throughout your body, gathered it together so that you can handle it, then place it on the presence of God within you as His great light, His great cosmic sound, greatest of all is love. Now those are distinct, definite forces of the presence of God within you. And if you place your concentration on any or all of those forces of God, aren't you one with Him? If you do that, then your will becomes one with His great wisdom-guided will. And then, with the right pattern of thought in your mind, His will flows through you, and that pattern will surely be projected and make you what you want to be, what you should be. I have one reference from the autobiography which I'll read at this time, from the great Larry Marshall, one of the great saints. He says, the human mind is a spark of the almighty consciousness of God. Isn't that wonderful? We're a spark of God's presence, His consciousness, His great love, and His power. The human mind is a spark of the almighty consciousness of God. I could show you that whatever your powerful mind believes very intensely, that means that you will very intensely, by uniting your will with God, would instantly come to pass. Instantaneous healings take place. Why? Because the pattern in God's consciousness is perfect. And then, when all obstructions are removed and His will flows, then the body can instantly be returned to its normal and perfect condition. That's how instantaneous healings take place. Those in between that, we have to utilize the power of mind and gradually bring back the condition so that the perfect pattern of God is projected in us and we are well again. So realize and remember these words of Larry Masha, in which he says that the human mind is a spark of the almighty consciousness of God. How we forget that and think we can't do a thing. We must realize these things. Saints have proved these things. We have to follow the saints and prove them to our own satisfaction. And so finally, the ordinary power of mind is good. You see some strong-minded people, but it's still limited. But when your mind becomes united with God's mind, or your consciousness becomes united with God's consciousness, then all things are possible, because your will then becomes His will. And so, first, keep the pattern right, the pattern of thought right in your consciousness. That's the first thing. Keep the consciousness of the presence of God in you. Keep that pattern right. And then, secondly, have full faith in God, no doubts. And that comes how? By full surrender to God. Let Him take care of you. What can we do? We can't make one cell of the body. Why not surrender to Him, let Him take care of us? It's the logical thing to do. So that's the second thing after you have the right pattern, is to fully surrender to God. Then your will becomes one with His will. And next, Don't doubt God. That's an important thing. Otherwise, what happens? The pattern becomes blemished. The pattern becomes distorted. That's the law. So never doubt God. Have the right mental pattern and full surrender to God. No doubt can ever enter into your consciousness. You cannot doubt Him if you have full surrender. These are very important points. And if you do these things, you do those three things, right pattern, full surrender to God, and don't doubt God, you will have sufficient power for all your needs. Everything, unlimited power will be yours, because you then do not act as a human being, but you act as a ray of God's great Spirit, His great consciousness, His great power, His great love.